in 1890, the framers of the Mississippi Constitution created a provision designed to disenfranchise black residents. They created a list of crimes that, upon conviction, carried a lifetime ban on voting and specifically included crimes more likely to be committed by black people based on statistics at the time. For example, the provision in its original form didn't disenfranchise people convicted of murder, but it did strip voting rights away from people convicted of crimes like forgery. Even though that provision has since undergone tweaks that proponents claim make it less racist, its effects are still pretty clear. Black Mississippians account for more than half of the 235,000 people who can't vote in the state because of a felony conviction. Despite that, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals last week rejected efforts by advocacy groups to strike down the provision, ruling that even though the law was created with racist intent, I want to repeat that, even though the law was created with racist intent, the plaintiffs weren't able to prove that it still operates in a racist manner. Joining me now, Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst Susan Del Percio. Also with us, Democratic strategist Adrienne Elrod. She's a former senior aide to the Biden-Harris campaign and sat next to me. So hello to both of you. Thank you so much for being here. Susan, this provision, hi. So Susan, I'll start with you. This provision was defended by the Mississippi Republican Attorney General. Do you think it's defensible at all that we're going to defend something that was created in 1890 that we're even admitting was racist by design?
There is no defense. Let's make that just abundantly clear. This should be changed. Even the Koch brothers, who many of your viewers will agree are pretty conservative folks, they fought very hard and were successful in Florida to allow people convicted of certain crimes to, after they've gone through the parole process and finish their sentence, that they could go back and vote. Now, Ron DeSantis has changed that with his voting police, but absolutely this should, I don't even understand what makes the Republicans try and defend this. Frankly, they could do a lot of good for themselves if they would actually get behind striking this type of policy down. It costs them virtually nothing and could build them a little bit of goodwill.
But Susan, just a quick follow-up. Are they not pushing back against it because they like it?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And what they're probably more concerned about now is look at the effect of Donald Trump. He has given voice that people used to want to hide in dark places and not talk about to these racist, anti-Semitic, disgusting voices out there that now have a platform. So I think that there are people like the Attorney General who either are afraid of a primary from their extreme right, I should say, or they just feel like they have a built-in audience in Mississippi.
It's a frustrating thought, but again, it's important to say, like, if they're not if they're not saying something is wrong, maybe they like that thing. Adrienne, do you think that they are consciously doing this because of some of the demographic shifts? Is that potentially an explanation as to why they would like a law like this? Because the voters that it disenfranchises aren't likely to vote for them, and they're not part of the emerging demographics of black and brown voters that are going to be majority soon.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Zerlina. And first of all, I'm so glad you're covering this. I mean, I think this issue, frankly, deserves more coverage than it's actually getting, because this is part of a systematic process that Republicans, to Susan's point, the extreme far right Republicans, are trying to put into place across the country. But yes, the bottom line is this, Zerlina. The reason why Republicans want to disenfranchise black voters in places like Mississippi is because black voters are increasing in numbers in Mississippi. This is one of those states where I think if we could just get a little bit more organized down there and get more Democrats, potential Democrats registered, we could flip some seats and we could probably win back one of those key Senate seats. This is not a state that has been deep red for a long time. This is a state that's been red for about the past, 10 to 15 years. So Republicans are worried that if we start losing states like Mississippi, or if they start losing those states in the 2024 presidential campaign, they're never going to be able to reclaim the White House again for them. So what they have to do is they have to go into some of these states where there's, some laws and some very friendly legislatures that are in Republican hands that they can work with to, one by one, disentangle some of these laws to make it that much harder for Black people to vote. But this is what's so frustrating too, Zerlina. As you mentioned, this is a law that was put in place in the late 1800s. Thankfully, there have been a lot of changes over the course of the last, 130 years to make it easier for Black voters to vote. But what you are seeing is because they know that they can't get a lot done at the federal level, Republicans are going into some of these states where they can make changes. And that's what we've got to keep an eye on, because if they do this in many more states, it is going to be that much harder for Democrats to reclaim the White House.
That's a really, really important point. And Susan, one of the things I think a lot about is, the 2012 autopsy that the Republican Party did on itself after they lost that election against Barack Obama. And one of the things they said in the autopsy was be less racist. I mean, paraphrasing, but that was essentially what they said, is be less racist and try to reach out to communities of color, because that's where the demographics are shifting towards. In terms of the question about racism, I think this conversation, when you're talking about a voting law that had racist intent, it was created in 1890, there's really no question about whether or not that's racist. I think it's harder to sort of pin the racism on an individual Trump supporter or Trump voter or a Republican. But it's harder for me to sort of reject that point, full stop. I mean, for so long in the Trump administration, we had to say, well, not all Trump voters are racist, not all Trump supporters are racist. But I don't know, when you're defending the Mississippi law from 1890,
no, if you're defending the
it's
Mississippi
racist, right?
law,
This is racist.
You're racist.
Sorry.
Do it. But you see, and here's one of the things that I would just wish that I know that there are a lot of Republicans who would agree with me and say that is a racist law. And what needs to happen is to get more people involved in voting across the spectrum, across the country, from inner cities to rural areas. The more people that vote, guess what? The more less extreme our candidates are on both sides of the aisle. Now, I know we're talking, and I'm not trying to say they're both sides on the racist side, but just in a general principle, we should be encouraging everyone to vote. And if you have been convicted of a crime and you are released and you want to be part of society and decide you want to vote, my God, that's like a very easy way of welcoming people back into the society and letting them take a good trail down, or a good path, if you will, to becoming a responsible citizen, because that starts with voting. So, absolutely, if you're supporting this law, you're not, it's not that you're a Republican who happens to be racist. You're just a racist who is racist.
I appreciate that point. And you don't ever have to throw in that, it's not relegated to one side or the other. I'm the first person to tell you that racism is not a partisan situation. There are plenty of progressives that struggle with blind spots and racism just like on the right. So racism is a full spectrum activity, if you will. So, Adrian, what message do you have, last question, for Democrats going into the midterm elections with a voting system like this? I mean, I know you and I had so many conversations with the campaign, and many campaigns have this conversation, about how much to talk about voter suppression itself, because some of the data and conventional wisdom is that talking about it actually suppresses the vote. But that's shifting now. How should Democrats talk about these voter suppression tactics going into the midterms?
Yeah, Zerlina, you literally took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, in 2016, before the voter suppression tactics, I mean, they were obviously happening in front of our very eyes with the Trump campaign. But, we were very careful, because if you talk about it too much, at least at that period of time, and you made it seem like voting was super complicated, which, by the way, it should not be. And in most places, it's not. Then you could turn off people and people could just say, forget it, I'm going to stay home. But I think now it's more important than ever to do a couple of things. Number one, anybody who has a platform, and this can also be Republicans, should use that platform to educate the people in their districts on how to vote in that particular state. Some states have funky laws when it comes to absentee, ballots. You got it in Pennsylvania. You've got to sign a couple different places. You need to make sure that voters understand that, so that Republicans or those who want to suppress voters have or basically have fewer levers to be able to do that, because you're going above and beyond what it takes to vote early, and you're following all the rules, and to vote, of course, on Election Day. But secondly, it's just important for us to get out there and get as many people as we can to vote, especially those who are not interested in suppressing the vote whatsoever. It just shows you, Zerlina, that, when we win these races by marginal, lines, it makes it that much easier for those who want to suppress the vote to say, oh, there was a little bit of, some sketchiness going on over here. So therefore, we're going to try to take away that election, that win from somebody. So we've got to get it out there. We've got to encourage people to vote, but we've got to win by bigger margins that we're winning by. And the good news for Democrats, Darlene, as you know, is the numbers are on our side. If we just get folks registered and get folks out to the polls, we will win a lot of these key races.
Adrienne Elrod and Susan Del Percio, two of my favorite people to talk about politics with. So thank you so much for joining today. It was great to see you both. Please stay safe.
Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.